It's good to see the inner you. Now you remember what it takes to go all the way. Welcome back. And I look forward to playing the game with you.
The Suffering series is one of the better overlooked third-person shooters with a dash of horror from the mid-2000s. It's dark, it's edgy, it's very much a product of its time. A much better time for the industry and world at large. The Suffering series has one of the better executed morality systems I've come across. Its smaller scope and focus allows for several choices to add up over the course of both titles. It's not like a 30+ hour RPG where quote-unquote choices matter, where more turn into the illusion of choice. The Suffering has a simple, engaging story that's told in an economical way. How it plays out depends on your actions. That said, the second title, Ties That Bind, does over-course correct in some areas. In some instances, it creates problems that didn't exist in the first Suffering. Still, it is a great game. Both are worth your time if you haven't played them. I've been meaning to check out the Suffering series for some time. I'm glad I did. As far as action horror goes, it's one of the better series around.
Escaping isn't as simple as just getting outside. But I don't need to tell you that. You know there is no real escape.
A few things of note before diving into The Suffering. If you want to play the games on a modern computer, there's a few small tweaks for a better experience. I'll provide a link to a patch you can use for both games. That said, I did have some lingering issues across both Suffering titles still. Not what I call a micro-stutter, more like a semi-micro-stutter. This would happen at various points. I fiddled around with various fixes and suggestions on forums and PC Gaming Wiki, but the issue remained. It's something I got used to and not a huge detriment, but it will be noticeable while watching. In The Suffering, we play as Torque. Yep, that's his name, or T as his ex-wife Carmen calls him. What kind of name is Torque anyway? This comes up in the second Suffering in the flashback with Carmen.
What did you say your name was?
Most call me Torque.
What kind of a full name is that? I can never call you that.
But you can call me whatever you want.
Torque is on death row for the murder of Carmen and their two sons, Corey and Malcolm.
You hear what this one did?
I don't want to know, and you know when
He beat his ex-wife to a bloody pulp. Killed her with his fists.
Look, I said I didn't...
Then he drowned one son in the tub and threw the other out a window. Don't ask me to cry for him.
Whew. Inmate, is this true?
Oh, he won't say. Claims he blacked the whole thing out. A likely story. The needle's too good for him. Filthy inmate. They should all die.
There are some discrepancies in this case, some circumstantial evidence and no witnesses. Torque deals with blackouts as well. That said, he is guilty of the fashion crime of rocking these mutton chops of his. At least he has the decency to keep his hands off when flushing toilets.
Torque! Did you spit on me, man?
The Suffering takes place on Carnate Island, the home of Abbott State Penitentiary. 10 miles off the coast of Maryland, the island and the penitentiary have a troubled past. This all began as far back as the late 17th century when settlers arrived. Accusations of witchcraft among the settlers tore apart the community. In the late 19th century, a wealthy family bought the island and built a large estate, only to leave not long afterward. The estate would become a mental institution, run by Dr. Killjoy until the 1920s. With a name like Killjoy, it shouldn't be a surprise he had questionable methods to how he treated patients.
And so, my favorite subject arrives. It is in this room that all the secrets will be revealed. I will employ an experimental device that helps me chart the undiscovered country. But you can't come to the show yet. First, you must prove to me that you truly want to be cured, and that you truly are worthy of my time. See you soon, I hope.
The US government used Carney as a prisoner of war camp during World War II. After the war, the state of Maryland used these facilities for Abbott State Penitentiary. And the penitentiary doesn't have the greatest of histories as well. It has one of the highest homicide rates amongst prisons in the country. There's a high turnover rate amongst wardens and correctional officers. The facility is run down. What we have here in The Suffering is an excellent underused setting among games, the setting of a prison. We'll have stretches outside Abbott on the island, but good stretches take place within. Torque is a silent protagonist, at least for the first Suffering. As shown in that clip earlier, he does talk in the sequel, although very little. We get some economical exposition here as the guards take Torque to his cell. The guards and inmates give insight into why Torque is here and how they feel about him.
Willie's bed isn't even cold yet, and already they brought in a new guy.
I heard he killed his old lady and kids. Sick motherfucker.
Be quiet, you jerry-curled fool. Don't you know who that is?
Why should I?
That's Torque, the man himself. Word is he shaved half the Aryan Brotherhood over at Easton.
Which makes it a bummer when the other prisoners die off in short order. The prison comes under attack by unknown forces. These prisoners have a lot of personality considering how little screen time they have. Too bad their cells didn't get blown open and we find them later during our travels in The Suffering. The Suffering released in 2004. I love the mid-2000s presentation. If graphics never evolved past this time frame, I would have been fine with that. For the longest time, I always assumed The Suffering used the Renderware engine, aka the engine that powered a large chunk of 6th generation games. No, this is Surreal Software's own engine, the Riot engine. Funny thing about the developer Surreal Software. Before doing this video, I didn't realize they made the Draken games. I remember playing the second Draken game on a PS2 demo disc. There's some notable voice acting in The Suffering. The first voice you hear in starting a new game is John Patrick Lowry, a voice I associate with Valve games. It's so weird to hear him elsewhere.
How many times have I done this? And I still hate it. I swear Abbott's full enough already.
He plays a few roles in The Suffering. On the note of Valve, there are sound effects within The Suffering that the Source engine uses, like the sound of bullets hitting a certain surface. Escaping her cell, there is great build up to the reveal of the first enemy, the Slayer, keeping them out of reach but offering brief glimpses before the reveal. The Suffering has some of the better, more memorable enemy designs around. There aren't a ton of enemies, but they're all distinct and have their own ways of dealing with them. The Suffering is the right length and pacing with enemy placement that doesn't get old. Part of the memorable enemy design is due to bringing in some outside Hollywood talent. While Surreal designed the initial creature designs, they hired Stan Winston Studios to finalize them. The late Stan Winston was a prominent special effects artist. He worked with artists like Steven Spielberg, John Carpenter, James Cameron, and Tim Burton. You've no doubt seen his work in films. One enemy I found puzzling was the Marksmen, the firing squad enemies. Great design, and with how they look, you would think they would be world destroyers. At first I thought they were going to be like a mini-boss when they first appeared. But no, they go down with relative ease, all things considered with their appearance. They're the second enemy type. And what's with these rat textures? They have an odd 2D look to them. The mainliners, creatures full of lethal injections, remind me of the tunnelers from Fallout New Vegas. Lucky for us, the mainliners go down a lot easier. We'll also fight inmates and guards at points, with somewhat comical health bars. They can take quite a while to go down. There are a couple of short stretches using searchlights on enemies to take them out, something the game doesn't do too much with. It's not like, say, Alan Wake with the use of light on enemies. Another enemy type is the Burrower, these worm-like creatures. If your timing is right, you can chuck a throwable down their hidey hole to take them out. The Nooseman enemy can throw you for a loop. I always hear about developers struggling to get the player to look up. Well, their attacks are one way of doing so. Step under them and they'll snatch you up. The Fester, no relation to Uncle Fester, shoots out rats. You can only kill them with explosives or melee attacks, not bullets. The Inferno makes an early appearance in The Suffering, but we don't fight them until the late game.
You saw the devil. He's close. Don't let him get you.
They appear as harmless girls at first, but that doesn't last long.
Ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
We have several weapons at our disposal. Shivs and fire axes for close combat. revolvers and Tommy guns. Tommy gun's a bit of an odd choice, but hey, I'll take it. Lots of fun mowing down enemies with it. I was pretty bummed out with the shotgun. Damage-wise, it's great, but the sound, it lacks an oomph. You can get a flamethrower, although you need to collect a few parts throughout a few levels to assemble it. There's also a secret gun, the Gonzo gun, a silly little Easter egg weapon that delivers some laughs and lightheartedness in a game with little due to its tone. For throwables, we have flashbangs, grenades, Molotov cocktails, TNT sticks. The TNT sticks can be quite unruly with how they behave. You have to be careful with how far you can throw them. Now, the Suffering isn't what I'd call a difficult game. Death was rare on the default difficulty. The game throws plenty of ammo your way. As long as you do some basic exploring, you'll find Zombium, a healing item, along with flashlight batteries and further ammo. The original pitch of the Suffering was Devil May Cry meets Resident Evil horror with Half-Life immersion. They focused on action horror as opposed to survival horror. Now, having the Devil May Cry element sounds a bit odd, and was something they dropped early in development. As a publisher, Midway requested a Devil May Cry-like horror game. Initial gunplay was to be lock-on based, similar to Devil May Cry or The Thing, which in 2004 would have left the game in a bad spot. Unlike Devil May Cry, the Suffering doesn't have a sophisticated combat system along with lock-on guns. But with the success of games like Max Payne on consoles, it gave them the confidence to use free aiming. Weird to think about now, and one of those things we take for granted. As far as combat goes, it handles like the many third-person shooters that emerged during the 6th generation. As good as something like Max Payne? No, but solid in how it feels. At least in third person. You can switch to first person, but shooting doesn't feel great. It lacks recoil and weight. This is fine for third person controls, but leads to a lesser experience in first person. Still, it is nice the Suffering gives you the option to change between the two. Guns, hand-to-hand, and throwables aren't our only options in the Suffering. Build up our insanity meter enough and we can transform for a time into a monster, one that can rip enemies to shreds in short order. You have to be careful though, as you can't heal during this and your insanity bar depletes. Drop to 0 and you're done. I wonder if the Arkham series took inspiration for the design and how they designed the Titan henchmen. What's interesting about this transformation is the implication it's all in Torque's head. You'd think changing into something like this would scare them away, but to them, Torque appears normal.
Do you feel well, sir? Are you feverish?
Throughout our journeys in the Suffering, we could come across archives, journals, notes, and flashbacks to flesh out the history of Carnate Island. One is a notebook of the monsters we come across. Clem, a prisoner on Abbott, documents them.
Nooseman. Not only is this Nooseman dead from being hung by the neck, but he also appears to have had his skin removed. I wonder if these creatures are tied to the legendary story of the inmates who, outraged by the death of fellow workers in a quarry mining accident, hung and skinned 5 COs. The Noosemen are more supernatural than many of their brethren, ripping themselves straight out of the ceiling in some entirely impossible manner.
These do spill out, or at least an interpretation of what these creatures represent. The Slayers are a manifestation of decapitation, hence the use of taking their heads off in combat. The Marksmen are a manifestation of the firing squad. The Mainliners are manifestations of lethal injections. The Infernos go way back in the island's history, back to the 17th century when the first settlers arrived on Carnate Island, and 3 young girls accused others of witchcraft which drove the settlement apart. Other notes we can find contain the history of Carnate Island. These are voiced by Consuela, the wife of Ernesto, one of the COs at Abbott. Somebody get this lady some water stat. The amount of mouth clicks she has while talking is ridiculous.
The island. Carnate Island is approximately 3 miles wide and lies some 10 miles off the coast of Maryland. In addition to man-made structures, Carnate is also home to a labyrinthine natural cave system, unlike anything I have seen before. Through my studies, I learned of the island's dark and unsettling history. Though it may sound ridiculous to say it, Carnate seems to bring out the worst in those who make the mistake of coming here.
Now, mouth clicks are something I fall victim to. I try my best to avoid while recording videos. But for whatever reason, when I record a voiceover for a video, my mouth dries up like a woman in the presence of Dreamcast Guy. We'll get brief flashbacks to various events that took place on Carnate Island.
For honoring your home over your new country. Enough! Weapons
your own men.
They're spies for the Nazis. They're a threat to our security. Am I supposed to ignore that goddamn airplane?
But
this prison is my command. I am God here. You will follow my orders.
And these aren't the only kind of flashbacks we'll get in The Suffering. Torque will have several around his family, around the murder. We'll get some pieces here and there, but not the entire puzzle.
You're so violent.
At other points, we'll see his ex-wife Carmen and his children Corey and Malcolm throughout the prison. This gives more insight into Torque and his past. And depending on how you play, what they'll say to you during each encounter can vary.
I'm pregnant. And that's not all. Look, it's over, T. You say you're innocent, but I don't know if I can trust you. I'm filing for divorce. You can't be a father in jail. I can't bring Corey here to visit you, or the new one. It's better if they just forget, for now. It's better for me, too.
I hope you've forgiven me, T. Things might be different if I had been able to hang on.
You would get so mad at us, and then you couldn't even remember. I never understood how you could forget.
The Suffering makes use of a morality system, a gameplay mechanic that started to appear in many games around this time frame. That said, it was more in the realm of role-playing games. The choices in The Suffering aren't a case of the game coming to a pause and getting us to select between dialogue options. Gameplay isn't interrupted. Do we gun down a guard or prisoner or take them with us? Do we save them or leave them to their fate? When these moments arise, we'll have an angel and a devil in our head telling us what we should do. Carmen is the angel, the devil being an unknown evil voice.
Look, I may be a CO, but believe me, I always thought I had more in common with the inmates than the gung-ho COs they got here at Abbott.
He'll help you, if you keep him safe.
He's weak.
You know what the magic out? Now, the only idea I have is that we gotta call for help.
Carmen will chime in afterwards depending on your actions. If you learn towards making virtuous actions, Carmen will talk more about you trying your best and being supportive.
Thanks, bro! Hey, I hope you make it out too!
There's hope for you yet, T.
If you indulge in evil, she'll talk about how a terrible person and father Torque was.
He wasn't hurting anybody.
Or if you are neutral in your actions, somewhere in between. There's no morality meter, although you can get an idea of what it is through a photo of your family. The more evil your actions are, the more dirty your family photo will be. Related to the photo, Torque's idle stance will change depending on your morality. Wait a few seconds and he'll take a look at the photo of Carmen and his boys. How he reacts will depend on your morality. Morality systems could be a bit hit or miss in their execution. In some cases, games can put too much weight into them where your choices begin to feel like illusions. But I like the implementation of it within The Suffering. Several decisions add up throughout the game and how you behave. And this changes the dynamic of Torque with his family. He could be a man struggling to do his best, but with the support of his family or a menace to anyone around him. The major beats leading up to the ending remain the same. It's not like the levels branch out depending on your morality. It's several decisions adding up throughout the game instead of a few major ones. This approach in The Suffering is more manageable from a developmental perspective. As a result, it doesn't feel like you're dealing with an illusion of choice or a letdown with how little your choices matter. Sure, there are only 3 endings, a good, evil, or neutral ending. But this isn't a 30+ hour RPG. Suffering is a good 6 to 8 hour playthrough. It doesn't feel shoehorned at the game and helps The Suffering stand out from its contemporaries. For my playthrough, I did stick towards good actions. As a result, I would have long stretches with others in tow, whether inmates or guards. They do provide some support in combat, but that still falls most on the player. Keeping others in tow gives insight into the island of Carnate and some of Torque's past actions. For example, one inmate can join us, Dallas, mentions Eastern. In the past, Torque was an inmate at Eastern Baltimore Correctional, something that's expanded upon in the sequel. And some of these companions can stay with Torque over several levels. One possible late-game companion is Ernesto. He's the husband of Consuela, the woman archiving the history of Carnate Island. He gives plenty of insight into the history of Carnate Island, and he's full of personality.
My wife told me the story of this place. 300 years ago, there was a Puritan village on this island. 3 young girls accused villagers of being in league with the devil. There were burnings. I think this is where they did it. They feared evil from within, but they did not see the real enemy.
To the point where if an enemy killed them off, I reload to keep them until the end. While most of these characters have limited screen time, they all show plenty of personality. That's why I mentioned earlier that I wish those on death row stuck around longer than the intro. There's plenty of life to these characters, and a place not exactly fit for life. Another great example is Sergey, a CO. After what he's seen, he's not going anywhere. Instead, he's going to chill out and smoke his pipe in peace.
I hear the sounds. Boom, crash, ah! I've seen some things through the doorway there. Things I don't want to see again. Understand? I stay right here. We're safe. And I have pipe to keep me company.
We can run into Clem, who by this point you've heard his voice when reading the entries on monsters. That's his work. Poor guy and his timing. He's planned his escape from Abbott for years. His boat's assembled and ready to go. Just as he's ready to make his escape, the events of the Suffering occur. Like the others we come across, he has limited screen time but is great to be around. A character full of life and personality.
Back from whence it came. Suffer in petroleum, troglodytes!
It's something that the Suffering exceeds with. In a short period of time, it gives these characters time to shine. They add a lot of personality and humor to these dire situations. It should be clear by now that the Suffering is a dark game. It's a quintessential, dark, violent, edgy title from the early to mid-2000s. It's on the same wavelength of games like Condemned and Manhunt. There's a great article I stumbled across last year called The Vulgar Wave. A period in time from the early 90s to the late 2000s when pop culture's main focus was on men in their 20s and 30s. The Suffering is a great example of a game falling under the vulgar wave. Check the description of the video for a link to the article if you're interested. Let's go through some of the major beats of the Suffering, so spoilers ahead. There are three key figures from Carnate Island's past that we'll come across. One is Hermes, who served with the President Executor for almost 30 years before placing himself in the gas chamber.
No. You cannot escape what I bring about.
Another is Horace, a former inmate killed by an electric chair whose presence still haunts Abbott.
You're doing well, Dork. But watch yourself. This place can eat your soul.
Third, we have Dr. Killjoy, psychiatrist who ran the asylum on Carnate with barbaric treatment practices.
Alas, the golden age of radio has passed us by. Who would care to broadcast only on the audio spectrum of human perception when it is the visuals that can truly enrapture an audience?
There's a scene early on in the Suffering where they're all present. We'll see them throughout afterwards in short blurbs.
Death is our stock and trade here at Abbott, the final solution. I am one of the few who will admit that. First it giveth, and it taketh away.
I've been here a long time. I don't understand much about this place, but I know your being here ain't no coincidence.
Well, look what we have here. How long I have been waiting to encounter such a fascinating specimen. My understanding is you've had periodic blackouts since, when was it? Ah yes, early adolescence. Ever wonder what happens during those blackouts? Would you say you have visions of bloodshed? Yes, surely there is bloodshed.
Later on in the Suffering, we'll head into the asylum that Killjoy ran. There's a great build-up before entering. Unlike most sections of the Suffering, the asylum is a confined space, looping back on itself instead of straight paths forward. Suffering does a great job with its level design on linear paths. It's not knocking it. They're well paced and don't wear out their welcome. But it's nice to see something more in line with traditional survival horror in its level design. Too bad there wasn't more of it. I did find this to be one of the better sections of the game. I didn't find there to be any real weak sections, but as far as standout sections go, the asylum is a highlight. I love the over-the-top theatrical presentation of Dr. Killjoy. The way he projects himself, both with his voice and through projectors, is quite memorable. They modeled his behavior on the actor Vincent Price. At first I thought he might be a bit too hammy, clashing with the game's tone. But that was an unfounded thought.
Nowhere do the stars shine as brightly as they do on Carnate Island, on this very stage where it is my pleasure to introduce to you the world of your own mind. Given a dark enough environment, this projector, this wonder of modern science, allows me to appear here before you today.
Near the end stretch, we'll deal with Horace in a boss fight. Save for the final fight, the boss fights in the Suffering aren't cases of point shoot until dead. With Dr. Killjoy, we have to deal with environmental obstacles to take him out. In the fight with Horus, we'll have to disable the power to the chair he's strapped into. The issue I have with this fight is how much backstory he gives during it. With all that's going on, it can be a bit hard to pay attention to what he's saying. A better choice would have been to spread out his information in the moments we come across him prior.
Nobody wants the whole story. Key, see you next life. Scalding! Just wanted to keep her safe. Couldn't protect her while I was on the inside. It ate me up. I lay awake at night thinking of what would happen to her. Any guy like me, any guy really loved his old lady would have done the same thing. Hard. So I couldn't take it anymore. So on that day, she came over for a conjugal and we fucked. I screwed her like I never had before. It was smooth, warm, rough, sweet. Best way of our lives. I can't fucking take it. And then she was laying there after. She looked so beautiful with a sheen of sweat on her. And I did it. I cut her. Every last inch of her. All over. I cut her. I just want to die!
Last, we have Hermes. John Patrick Lowry voices him. As mentioned earlier, I associate him with Valve titles, so it is a bit odd to hear him elsewhere. But he's a constant presence throughout the Suffering, an executioner who one day turned the gas on himself.
In the lighthouse, you showed me just how good a killer you really are. But you don't know anything. Go on to the dock, where you'll see how things really are.
And while he talks plain our final encounter with him, there's less going on here so it's easier to follow along. It's a fitting fight for him shutting off gas sources in the room.
I love the history on Carnate. Over the years, every form of human killing has found its place. I envy you, because you get to revisit them all.
Although the fight can take longer than need be. You have to trap him, but you may take time spotting the location where you can do that. The final stretch has us powering the lighthouse and getting off Carnate. Ernesto, a guard on the island and husband of Consuela, the woman narrating the history of Carnate, can join us for a time. There's this one bit between combat encounters where we're trapped in a tunnel, fire on both sides closing in. Ernesto throws in the towel at a moment's notice. There's an odd way of stopping this fire. This came up early in the game when you had to put out a fire blocking a doorway. To do so, you cover a water drainage source with an object. It's comical how the water spreads out as a result.
It is horrible to die this way after surviving so long. I will never see my Consuela again. We're done for. Dios mío. A miracle. The fire is out. Again, you prove yourself. Come on. We must get to town.
While we head out to the docks, fire separates us from Ernesto. He's heading into town to see if his wife and daughters are still alive. His fate is left unknown. It's another case of the Suffering giving us time with side characters and getting us to care about them in short order. Of course, this is optional. You're free to gun him down at any point.
Why couldn't you give him a chance?
But there's much to gain from keeping him around, especially on the narrative front. He gives plenty of insights into life on Carnate Island. To cap off the Suffering, Torque comes face to face with his greatest foe, the monster inside him. It's a straightforward fight, but the strong narrative makes it a fitting climax of what's come before. Depending on your actions, Torque's two sons and Carmen will give us words of support, or damning him for what he did to them.
They killed us to get to you, didn't they? I forgive you, Dad. You couldn't keep us safe forever. I just wish I could have said goodbye.
You always had the worst luck, T. We didn't work out for so long. And when we got close, it all got taken away. You'd never hurt us. Not on purpose. No matter how angry you got at the world, you always loved me and the boys. Now's the time, T. You need to face down the anger you have inside. Remember, I'm right there with you.
With that, we could see the rest of the blanks left in the flashback of the murder of Torque's family. In the good ending, Iron Men are responsible for the death of Carmen, Corey, and Malcolm. They leave Torque with parting words, one addressed in the sequel.
The Colonel sends his regards. Back in Eastern, he warned you, but you didn't listen. He said to leave you alive. Only you. Enjoy your new life.
Picked up by boat and heading to Baltimore, the man on board mentions Torque's going to be up for a new trial. In the evil ending, the flashback reveals Torque did not hesitate in killing his family. Instead of leaving on the boat, he kills the captain and stays on the island. In the neutral ending, Torque kills Carmen by accident during an argument. In what I feel to be the game's darkest moment, Corey drowns his brother in the bathtub before throwing himself out the window. The boat picks up Torque, but the captain mentions the cops are waiting to pick him up. Torque knocks him out and heads off into the unknown. But there's more to the suffering after completion. Firing up a new game will have a prelude to the first chapter of Torque arriving on Carnate. Attacked by other inmates, Torque unleashes the beast within. We see its true form before taken to death row.
Drop your weapons, inmate.
Which one of you do I get to shoot
still
first?
believe in you.
This was the initial plan of how the suffering would start before changing it, which I feel to be the right choice. Regardless of what happens, Torque's family is dead, but how it happens will vary depending on your choices. In regards to why it happened, that's something that Ties That Bind will get into. Overall, the suffering is a great little excursion. It's a case of a game being all killer, no filler. One with excellent pacing and doesn't wear out its welcome. It tells its story in a simple, effective manner. The smaller scope allows for the morality system to have some great execution. It doesn't veer into the realm of quote-unquote illusion of choice. Common outcome for many games with similar systems. Its sequel, Ties That Bind, would continue in the same vein. While it's a great continuation in some ways, there are mixed results of changes to the core gameplay. As well, the story gets a bit messy, although it does have moments of brilliance.
It's time for all the players to show themselves. When it comes to the end game, it'll only be the two of us. And maybe one other. You should already know him. And I've got some friends that can help you get reacquainted.
For the prelude of Ties That Bind, it begins 5 years before the events of the suffering. Torque is serving a sentence in Eastern Correctional Facility in Baltimore, something referenced several times throughout the suffering. If you have a completed save file present of the suffering, you could carry over those choices. This changes how the beginning plays out depending on if you're good, neutral, or evil. I did find a TV trope article listing games where you could carry over saves from past titles. Quite a long list. Many fall under the JRPG category. That said, most save data carryover tends to be small bonuses. You might get an extra skin or a weapon. Konami had some fun carrying over save data. One example is the first Metal Gear Solid. The game would acknowledge save data of other Konami games.
You like Suikoden. So, you like Azure Dreams? You like Castlevania, don't you?
Another amusing save data carryover is a bonus scene in Silent Hill 3 with Silent Hill 2 save data present.
Oh, forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
As far as carrying over narrative elements, that list is far smaller. The titles that pop to my mind first are the Mass Effect series or The Witcher. But unlike those series, the Suffering series is far smaller in scope. It's a couple of games with around 6 to 8 hours for each campaign. With the Mass Effect series, you're looking at a trilogy with each title spanning 25 plus hours. Anyone who has played the Mass Effect series know one of these series' largest flaws: how choices carry over and play out during the trilogy. Some can be quite disappointing, but with a smaller scope and focus, the Suffering series doesn't fall victim to these issues. There are a couple of notable voices during the intro of Ties That Bind, one being that Torque speaks. Only one line during the intro, but something we didn't hear in the original. He'll have a few lines throughout Ties That Bind.
Looks like trouble.
The other notable voice is Blackmore, the man who will be a thorn in our side throughout the Suffering too. In the good ending of the Suffering, the murderers of Torque's family mention the Colonel. That's Blackmore. And Blackmore has such a strong presence throughout the Suffering Ties That Bind.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a last minute entry, and now I'm playing this game.
One key factor is his voice. The late Michael Clark Duncan provides it. Michael's voice is so distinctive and commanding. He's up there with the likes of the late Tony Jay or Keith David in having the authoritative voice. Since I've already poked fun at him once in this video, his voice is the polar opposite of someone like a Dreamcast guy. We'll have a stretch in Eastern Penitentiary during a prison riot before cutting back to the present. were picked up by some heavily armed thugs. Depending on the save data you carry over, how and where they pick you up can vary. Carrying over the good ending of the first game, Torque heads to shore and runs into these armed forces. Convenient blackout allows him to strap him up. If you carry over the evil ending, Torque is still on the island, where armed forces arrive by helicopter to pick him up. Carrying over the neutral ending, Torque sees Carm in the water, and the special forces get him to dock the boat ashore. These mercenaries take us to their leader, Jordan. She has a keen interest of Torque and what happened on Carnate Island. She's one stylish woman who's as cold as ice.
These malefactors are my life's work, and meeting someone as intimate with them as you, well, that's not something that happens to a girl every day.
Jesus, what's happening?
Speak to me. Which one of you Neanderthals dropped the ball?
I don't know. The lights just went out.
Who can tell me something that isn't painfully obvious?
We need to extract you ASAP.
Seems prudent. Everybody out with me except you two. You stay in with him. You outside the door. Do it.
Not long afterward, Torque is free from his shackles, with Carmen guiding us back to Torque's apartment in Baltimore. There are a couple major tweaks to combat in Ties That Bind. The end result is mixed. In some ways it works well, in other areas it's a downgrade from the first Suffering. The first major change is the 2-weapon limit. In the original we could carry as much as we wanted. I guess one of the higher-ups said make it like Halo. Halo 2 released between the two Suffering titles. Ah, the days of we want the Halo audience. Far better than wanting the Call of Duty audience. As a result of this change, combat can be more frantic. There's more weight and higher stakes. Dying was rare in the Suffering on the default difficulty, but far more common for me in the Ties That Bind. There's a lot more choices here weapon-wise. There are a couple of variations of shotguns available, for example. They offer far more oomph compared to the original. One thing that Ties That Bind does far more often than the original is waves of combat. We can't progress forward until we've cleared out several waves of enemies. You're keeping a much closer eye on your ammo here, but there are issues with swapping weapons. There were several times throughout Ties That Bind where I drop an empty gun, find something else, empty that gun's ammo, end up picking the original gun with no ammo. Not the best kind of situation you want to deal with in the heat of the moment. But in regards to the heat of the moment, the change to the health system are far more frustrating than the 2-weapon limit. In the first Suffering, you would pick up and store Zombium and use it when need be. Here, Torque uses Zombium on pickup. Ties That Bind loves to put several Zombium bottles next to one another. If you're not careful, it's easy to grab several of them when you only want to take one for now, when you want to have one on hand in case combat didn't go your way. This is one of the main reasons death was far more common in Ties That Bind than in the original. There's only one encounter, the game's final encounter, where Zombian will be periodic and respawning, which feels like a bit of a band-aid to a bullet wound solution. Between the 2-weapon limit and using healing items on pickup, the healing changes to Ties That Bind were the more frustrating switch. Now this end result is a system that veers away from action horror and more into survival horror territory with resource management, which I can appreciate to an extent. The stakes are plenty higher in combat scenarios. As mentioned, death was rare in the first Suffering. These gameplay changes resulted in more deaths. But it's a case of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. If the first game was too generous and easy, Ties That Bind overcorrected. There were certain sections where I died more in Ties That Bind than the entire playthrough of the original, but several of these deaths veered more into frustration. I'm curious to how the game would play out difficulty and fun-wise if they kept the weapon limit but allowed the player to heal when they wanted to. A change that has much better integration is the insanity system. There are certain enemies that you can only defeat in your insanity form. Shooting them will do nothing. What happens if you don't have enough of a charge to transform? They'll spawn in enemies so you can build up your meter. It's a nice little addition to throw more challenges your way and never enters frustration territory. The special attacks you can use while transformed depend on your morality. My favorite special attack was mowing enemies down with a machine gun. Ties That Bind offers a larger enemy roster. Most reappear with the addition of new enemies. One new addition is the Arsonist in place of the Inferna. They're a manifestation of fires in abandoned buildings in Baltimore. Another new addition is the Triggermen. They're like the marksmen from the first Suffering, but can hit like a truck if you're not careful. They're a manifestation of the gun violence in Baltimore.
Screw it! I'm going out there to get him! What the hell is that thing?
Watch out!
Another notable addition are the suppressors. They're missing their legs, using their arms to navigate in the light to spot us. If you want, you can sneak past them. Ties that bind adds the ability to crouch. If they spot you, deal with them quickly as they could kill you before you know it. They're a manifestation of some of the brutal treatments of inmates at Eastern. On the note of crouching, for whatever reason, they've made rolling more of an ordeal. Instead of having a set button like the first game, you have to crouch, hold a direction, and the jump button to dodge. That said, strafing does the job most of the time to avoid enemy attacks, but this was a bit of an annoyance. In regards to the original cast of enemies, the reasoning for appearing have shifted. Instead of mainliners being a manifestation of lethal injections, they're representations of Baltimore junkies. We'll come across several of them throughout Ties That Bind. I wonder how their drugs compare to ones like WMD.
Nothing can ruin you, T.
I gotta get me some I hear the WMD is the bomb.
The Slayer evokes street crime in Baltimore with blades. The explanations of the returning enemies feel a bit shoehorned, but nothing too egregious. Besides, they're great enemies, so why not reuse them here? Clem, an inmate of Carnate, provide an insight into our enemies in the first Suffering. Speaking of Clem, I hope he's doing well. Unless they miss something, there's no mention of him and his fate here. In Ties That Bind, the monster explanation falls to Jordan. She's obsessed with her research in these malefactors, as she calls them. She's working in cahoots with Blackmore.
Triggerman. A human corpse forms the center of this malefactor. The body appears to have suffered multiple gunshot wounds, particularly to its head, which has lost a significant portion of its mass.
Beyond enemies in Blackmore, there are a couple of lingering presences throughout Ties That Bind. One of them is Copperfield, the slave hunter. He'll pop up several times throughout, sending his maulers after us.
My aim was always true. To this day, I have never lost a slave, not even the great-great-grandson of a runaway.
The other one is far more unsettling. Luther Stickwell, otherwise known as the Creeper. An urban legend in Baltimore, he was a pimp who killed anywhere from 50 to 200 women. His appearance is unsettling, with 3 women attached to him, along with as a voice to make your skin crawl.
What do you have in there, Torque? She gonna find out your secrets? You know that's how these bitches work. They slide up in close and try to suck your life away. Remember, blood's the best lubricant.
The morality system returns with a few small tweaks. One is the addition of a morality meter, something I didn't feel was necessary. It makes decisions feel more gamey as a result. Granted, I can see the reasoning for it. As mentioned earlier, your special attacks while transformed vary depending on your morality. Make choices in the opposite direction, and your special attack can degrade to what you had prior. Like the original, we'll have Carmen being the voice of good, with Blackmore being the voice of evil. While I tend to stick to good choices, I would try out the evil ones to hear that voice of Blackmore.
Be calm, T. Let him explain
This kind locked you up and made you lose so much.
He could be a friend.
You must die. You're strong. You showed him.
With that, let's go through the game's plot and highlights, so spoilers ahead. Returning to Torque's apartment will play out in different ways depending on the ending choice of the prior game. What Carmen, Malcolm, and Corey will say to us throughout will depend on these past choices along with our current ones. At first, I thought that Ties That Bind would be a retread of the first plot. In some ways, it is. After all, whatever happens, Torque's family's dead. How they die depends on past choices.
You know what I learned from this, T? You knew. Blackmore told you he was gonna kill us, and what did you do? Nothing. His men call him the Colonel for a reason, because they follow his orders. And you did nothing. You might as well have killed us yourself. What are you doing? What are you doing? No, stop!
But Ties That Bind goes beyond that. We get more insight into Torque's past and who Blackmore is. And that's more than enough to carry the game's plot forward. Returning once again is Dr. Killjoy. A nice return, adding that theatrical flair.
Newsflash, Dateline Baltimore. Mayhem in the city as history's worst atrocities walk the streets, and law enforcement is powerless to contain the threat. And it would appear our dashing hero Torque is right back where he started.
Depending on your current morality and prior game choices, Jordan will appear more often, in some cases helping you. There is a stretch regardless of where you team up, but a late game fight against a helicopter can either be against her if you're good, or with her against Blackmore if evil. Once again, how key characters talk to us will depend on our actions. Major beats play out the same on the gameplay front, but the narrative within can vary, which, as mentioned in my thoughts on the first Suffering, is a great way of dealing with a morality system. Give smaller choices that end up with a more focused, narrow scope. Blackmore is a constant presence throughout Ties That Bind, whether through flashbacks or the present. The writer of Ties That Bind mentioned the show The Wire as an influence, fitting with the Baltimore setting, but also with how Blackmore talks. He loves mentioning players and games.
You're making a mistake. You were born to play the game. You can't walk away from it.
But the game is out there, and it's either play or get played.
In Miles' bar, a close friend of Torque, we get a flashback of how Torque ended up in Eastern. Now there are some curious facts brought up here. Despite how much Miles has heard of Blackmore, he's never seen him. And while the cops arrest Torque, why do they not acknowledge Blackmore's presence?
I told you couldn't walk away. And what's the little lady going to say now?
Hold that thought for now. While Ernesto does not make an appearance in Ties That Bind, his wife Consuela does. And not only reading the archives about the history of Baltimore. We could rescue her, but she joins us as a companion for a time. She wants to return to Carnate Island to find Ernesto and her daughters. Considering Ernesto was looking for his daughters as well, that doesn't bode well for their fate. During this stretch, I was thinking we were going to return to Carnate, take care of some unfinished business. Turns out that wasn't the case. Only Consuela will head back there. Here's to hoping she could find Ernesto and her daughters.
Magnifico! Maybe Ernesto was wrong. Clearly not all the inmates in Abbott are the devil incarnate.
You gave her so much. Her family.
It's another great case of how economical the Suffering can be with its characters. With Ernesto and Toa in the first game, I would reload each time we died until we parted ways. I ensured the same for Consuela. There's one bit where the creeper pops up and tries to kill her in an unsettling moment.
You think you're so smart? You're not smart enough to escape my shot!
Thank you.
No! What are you doing?
After the creatures appeared on Carnate, I was there for some time, and thank you.
We get an overly long turret section that comes across as padding, but hey, Ties That Bind came out around 18 months after the original. We form an uneasy alliance with Jordan. Blackmore has betrayed her along with her men. While we don't head back to Abbott Penitentiary, we still get plenty of time in prison in Ties That Bind. Blackmore is waiting for us beneath Baltimore Eastern Penitentiary. On that note, while there are great stretches here, Eastern lacks the atmosphere of Abbott. This is where the game really starts to ramp up on encounters and waves. One notable example is near this staircase on fire. This goes on for quite some time. This was a section where I had the struggles of picking up several zombiums at once when I only wanted one. I had more deaths during this encounter than my entire playthrough of the first Suffering. Along the way in Eastern, we could gain temporary allies like the Warden. He must be a fan of the band Pantera, the Exorcist film, or both. Descending through Eastern, we'll end up at Blackmore's Drowning Pool for a notable encounter. This felt like a perfect time to get a licensed track from the band Drowning Pool, but that's not the case. Copperfield, the Creeper, and Dr. Killjoy are present. Killjoy reviews and comments on our choices throughout Ties That Bind. It's something that the first game didn't do, and I find it detracts from the overall experience. It feels gamey, for lack of a better term.
Moving right along, were you more helpful when the subject was someone a bit more easy on the eyes? Do you remember Consuela?
Maybe Ernesto was wrong. Clearly not all the inmates in Abbott are the devil incarnate.
Most touching. It would appear chivalry is not quite dead, merely decomposed.
It's like that one scene at the end of the first season of Telltale's The Walking Dead, where the stranger reviewed the choices you made. Something that feels a bit on the nose and binary. Depending on your morality, you'll either fight Copperfield or the Creeper. For my playthrough and sticking with good choices, I fought Copperfield. He gives some interesting insights into the ancestors of both Torque and Carmen.
Do you even know?
Before we finally deal with Blackmore, we come across one intriguing figure, one Rance Truman. All the notes during the loading screens in both games, that's his writing. Carmen and Blackmore have choice words for him.
He seems eccentric, but harmless.
Will ruin you.
He's not what he seems.
Bleed him out. Splatter his brains. Kill, kill, kill.
You were in Abbott, just like me. I can tell from the pants, of course, but also your eyes. The eyes can't hide what they have seen.
He has quite a bit to say here, including the fact the monster is not attacking him. There's a lot of mystery around him. If they did ever get around to making a third Suffering title, I'm sure he would have been a key figure. We head to Garvey Children's Home, where Torque grew up. Then comes the reveal of Blackmore. Torque first met him here as a child, but he looked the same. Blackmore is part of Torque. When Torque suffers blackouts, that's when Blackmore emerges. Depending on the ending of the first Suffering, how Blackmore influences the death of Torque's family varies. In the good ending, where armed men killed Torque's family, Blackmore sent them. But he only meant to scare them and is angry for his men killing Torque's family. Another possibility is Blackmore getting his men to get Corey hooked on drugs. This gives more explanation to why he drowned his brother before throwing himself out a window. This twist of Blackmore being part of Torque isn't meant to be a shocker. There are plenty of clues along the way. One of them involves Torque talking. While he doesn't talk much, I was thinking, hey, that sounds like Michael Clark Duncan when he would. To make it less obvious, they EQ Torque's voice to have less bass.
What'd you say that guy's name was?
Blackmore. You meet her here, am I right? If you're gonna make it far, you need to be unattached. My people need to be thinking clear and sharp, not to be swayed by what some pretty face whispers in their ear.
And their final fight with Blackmore is excellent. A nightmare landscape of the Garvey's children home. We need to build up our insanity meter to damage Blackmore while we're transformed. This area will respawn zombiums after certain waves, thank goodness. But it feels like a band-aid to a bullet wound solution. Had they kept with the healing system of the original, they wouldn't have had to do this. And while lots going on in this fight, Blackmore's dialogue doesn't get buried. It's not like the fight with Horace in the first Suffering where it's hard to focus on what he's talking about during the fight. Blackmore is boosted up in the mix so it's easy to hear. It also doesn't hurt when you have a voice like Michael Clark Duncan.
It's hard to run an operation when you're only in control a few hours a week. With you gone, I can take the game so much farther.
Once again, the ending plays out depending on your morality. In the good ending, Torque overcomes Blackmore and vanquishes him forever.
You played right. I couldn't get you to break the rules. And the way I play, it's all or nothing.
Times like this, it's hard to know what to say. You walked the line, T. You stayed true. And the happiness I know proves you were right. Even with what happened to me, the ties that bind us are too strong. No one else can compete. And I mean it this time when I say, I never want us to be apart again.
In the neutral ending, Blackmore holds his ground and still remains a part of Torque.
That's what I thought. Looks like we're going to play this game a while longer. I couldn't change you, and you couldn't get rid of me. The ties that bind, they'll keep us connected, but apart.
In the evil ending, Blackmore overcomes Torque.
Fool! You didn't know one thing about the end game. Should have given up sooner. Admitted you just wanted to be me. Now I'm full-time, baby. I can rule this town.
And with that, ends the Suffering series. Now, as much as I like Blackmore, he does create various issues to the plot. Not to the same extent, but reminds me of the differences between the Condemned 1 and Condemned 2. The second Condemned at the end of the game got really out there with the plot. A lot of mysteries got answers, ones that didn't need them. This did take away from the overall experience. There were lingering plot threads laid out from the original Suffering. Ties That Bind takes these threads and runs with them to mixed results. To soften the blow, the stellar voice acting of Blackmore makes up for some of these issues. Jordan has several mysteries about her, but feels like they could have done more with her. Give more concrete reasoning to her goals and her role in the overall story. I'm not saying that they need to make a third Suffering. Ties That Bind is a decent end to the story, but some of these story choices do take away from the impact of the original. And it is a shame that this would be the last title of Surreal Software. They were working on This Is Vegas, their crack at the Grand Theft Auto formula. Surreal was under the Midway umbrella. Midway hit hard times and went bankrupt in early 2009. Warner Brothers would purchase their assets. Warner would cancel This Is Vegas in the summer of 2010. Not a cheap cancellation. At this point, the game was a good 5 years in development with around $50 million poured into it. Surreal would merge with Monolith Productions under the W Games umbrella. Who knows who's still around there who worked on the Suffering titles? Now, if they want to, they could bring the series back, although if anything, I'd only want to see a remaster for modern consoles. The series ended fine as is. A remake wouldn't be able to capture that mid-2000s magic that The Suffering delivers in droves. And not what I call fantastic games, but The Suffering titles are rock-solid entries from gaming's heyday. Very much a product of a better time. A quintessential dark, edgy, violent title that we saw around that time frame. It's interesting to see their take on a morality system, one that tends to stick in the realm of role-playing games and how they integrate it in a way that doesn't feel gimmicky or creating illusions of choice. While the sequel would create issues that didn't exist in the original Suffering, they're great experiences that few games can scratch a similar itch. Thanks for watching. If you haven't done so already, like, subscribe, comment. If you'd like to support the channel further, consider becoming a patron member or a YouTube member. You'll get access to videos earlier, be featured in the forthcoming credits, and get periodic updates.